Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. The Nile, Egypt's ancient lifeline, has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for thousands of years. Its waters have nourished fields, sustained cities, and inspired legends. But today, the river flows through a nation facing one of its gravest challenges in modern history. A crisis that threatens not just Egypt's economy, but the very fabric of daily life for millions. Once bustling with activity, the factories lining the Nile now stand eerily silent. The hum of machinery has faded, replaced by the quiet of abandonment. These empty industrial complexes are stark reminders of a nation brought to a standstill. In June 2025, Egypt was forced to make an unthinkable decision: to shut down its entire fertilizer industry. This wasn't a calculated move or a strategic pause. It was an act of desperation, a last resort as the country's energy supplies vanished almost overnight. The natural gas that once powered Egypt's homes, factories, and farms was abruptly cut off. Cities plunged into darkness, and the nation was thrust into an unprecedented energy crisis. Streets that once glowed with light now flicker with uncertainty, as families brace for long, cold nights. Egypt's role as a major global fertilizer supplier means the shockwaves are being felt far beyond its borders. With exports halted, food prices are climbing worldwide, and farmers from Africa to Asia are scrambling to secure the supplies they need for the next harvest. At the heart of this crisis lies a volatile geopolitical struggle. Escalating tensions between Israel and Iran have severed the critical gas pipelines that once fueled Egypt's economy, exposing the country's dangerous dependency on foreign energy sources and leaving its future uncertain. Now, more than 110 million Egyptians are facing a harsh winter marked by rolling blackouts, soaring food costs, and a growing sense of unrest. Families gather in candlelit rooms, worried about how they'll afford their next meal or keep their children warm. This is not a crisis born overnight. It is the eruption of vulnerabilities and missteps that have accumulated over years. An urgent warning of what happens when a nation's lifelines are stretched too thin, and the world's stability hangs in the balance. Egypt once dreamed of energy independence after discovering the Zohr gas field in 2015. For a few years, the country exported gas and aspired to be a regional energy hub. But by 2022, domestic production declined while demand soared, forcing Egypt to import more gas, mainly from Israel. By early 2025, Israeli gas made up as much as 20% of Egypt's total consumption. This deep reliance created a dangerous vulnerability, tying Egypt's energy security to regional stability. The government knew the risks, but immediate needs outweighed long-term caution. The gamble worked, until conflict erupted. Egypt's energy future now hung on a single, fragile thread. The Israel-Iran conflict exploded, sending shockwaves far beyond the immediate battlefield. What began as a regional standoff quickly escalated, drawing in neighboring countries and threatening to destabilize the entire Middle East. The world watched in alarm as missile strikes lit up the night sky, and the fragile balance of power teetered on the edge. In the midst of this chaos, Egypt was caught in the crossfire. Its fate suddenly intertwined with the outcome of a conflict it hadn't started. As tensions mounted, Egypt's strategic position between Israel and Iran made it especially vulnerable to the fallout. Israel, fearing attacks on its critical infrastructure, made the decision to shut down its Leviathan and Karish gas fields. These fields were not just energy sources for Israel, they were lifelines for Egypt, supplying the majority of its imported natural gas. With a single order, Egypt's main gas supply was instantly cut off. The flow didn't just slow, it stopped completely. Suddenly, Egypt was plunged into an energy crisis, facing a massive shortfall that threatened to bring daily life to a standstill. Blackouts swept through cities, and the hum of industry faded as factories lost power. The government faced a brutal choice: ration the dwindling gas supply for homes, risking economic collapse, or cut off industry to keep the lights on for millions of citizens. Every decision carried enormous consequences for families and businesses alike. On June 13, 2025, Egypt made a desperate move, halting all fertilizer production nationwide. This sacrifice was meant to preserve enough energy to power hospitals, homes, and essential services, but it came at a steep cost to agriculture and industry. This drastic measure was just the beginning. Emergency plans were activated, diverting every available molecule of gas to power stations. Utility workers raced against time to keep the grid alive, knowing that any misstep could plunge the nation into darkness. The crisis, triggered by a distant conflict, now threatened to topple Egypt's economy. The stock market tumbled, businesses shuttered, and ordinary Egyptians faced an uncertain future as the nation's stability hung in the balance. The dominoes were falling fast, and Egypt was racing to keep up as the crisis deepened with every passing hour. In 2014, Egypt found itself in the grip of a severe energy crisis, one that threatened to bring the country to a standstill. The government launched a frantic, multi-billion-dollar effort to fill its widening energy gap, scrambling to keep the lights on in homes, factories, and hospitals. The stakes were enormous. Without urgent action, the country faced the prospect of widespread blackouts, economic paralysis, and growing public unrest. With Israeli gas supplies abruptly cut off, Egypt was left with no choice but to turn to the global market for liquefied natural gas, or LNG. The government was forced to buy at any price, competing with energy-hungry nations around the world. The cost was staggering, but the alternative, letting the country go dark, was unthinkable. In a matter of months, Egypt signed contracts for 150 LNG cargoes, worth over $8 billion. This was the largest energy import in the nation's history, a desperate move to secure enough fuel to keep the power stations running. Each shipment was a lifeline, but also a reminder of Egypt's growing dependence on volatile global markets. But there was a major obstacle. In previous years, Egypt had dismantled much of its regasification infrastructure, believing it would no longer be needed. Now, with LNG ships arriving, the country had to act fast, rushing to secure floating storage and regasification units, or FSRUs, to convert the imported gas back into usable fuel. Within months, 3 FSRUs were deployed at key ports like Suez, Damietta, and Ain Sokhna. This doubled Egypt's regasification capacity in record time, a remarkable feat of logistics and engineering under immense pressure. These floating terminals became the country's new energy gateways. Yet, these floating terminals were only a costly, temporary fix. They kept the grid running, but at a huge financial burden. For now, they were all that stood between Egypt and the threat of nationwide blackouts, a fragile barrier against darkness. Meanwhile, the crisis was being felt everywhere. Austerity measures and fuel switching hit industries and households alike. Factories slowed production or shut down, workers faced layoffs, and families endured long hours without electricity, relying on candles and flashlights to get by. The energy crunch was reshaping daily life across the country. As winter approached, the threat of rolling blackouts loomed larger than ever. Utility workers raced to repair aging infrastructure, but the grid remained fragile. News tickers warned citizens to prepare for outages, and many wondered how much longer the country could hold on. Egypt's energy planning had never been more exposed. The crisis revealed deep vulnerabilities in the nation's energy strategy, forcing officials to confront hard questions about the future. For millions of Egyptians, the scramble for power was not just a headline. It was a daily struggle for light, heat, and hope. Halting fertilizer production sent shockwaves through Egypt's farmlands. Farmers, dependent on fertilizer, now face plummeting crop yields and threatened food supplies. Food prices are rising fast, squeezing millions already living in poverty. Egypt's agricultural exports, vital for foreign currency, are at risk, just as the country needs funds for expensive LNG imports. The economic pain is twofold: soaring import bills and shrinking export revenues. Thousands of fertilizer workers are now jobless, deepening unemployment and social strain. Each silent factory means a community in crisis. The shutdown's human and economic costs are mounting daily. Egypt's crisis is shaking global food and energy markets. Its sudden fertilizer exit has triggered a supply shock, sending prices soaring and leaving nations scrambling for alternatives. Higher fertilizer costs mean higher food prices worldwide, worsening food insecurity for millions. Egypt's massive LNG purchases have driven up global prices, creating a bidding war and straining supplies for Europe and Asia. The crisis exposes the fragility of global supply chains to regional shocks. Egypt, though not a direct combatant, is now a major casualty of Middle East conflict. The world is learning just how interconnected and vulnerable our systems truly are. On Cairo's streets, anxiety and frustration are rising. For ordinary Egyptians, the crisis means higher food prices, power outages, and economic uncertainty. Social media buzzes with complaints and fears about the coming winter. The government enforces strict controls on dissent, but public discontent simmers beneath the surface. The state's legitimacy now hinges on its ability to deliver basic needs: food and electricity. Memories of past uprisings fuel concern among officials and citizens alike. The government must do more than manage logistics. It must manage public trust. Egypt's social contract is being tested as never before. Egypt's emergency LNG imports and floating terminals are a costly, short-term fix. Experts warn that relying on volatile global markets is unsustainable and drains Egypt's foreign reserves. If Israeli gas remains offline, Egypt faces a cycle of expensive stopgaps and mounting debt. The crisis exposes years of failed energy strategy and over-reliance on a single supplier. Analysts urge Egypt to invest in domestic exploration, renewables, and diversified imports. Without structural change, Egypt risks lurching from one crisis to the next. The current strategy buys time, but at a steep price. A fundamental reset is urgently needed. As autumn 2025 unfolds, Egypt stands at a crossroads. Emergency measures have bought time, but the nation's vulnerabilities remain. Egypt's crisis is a warning to the world. Regional conflicts can trigger global shocks. The path forward demands rebuilding domestic energy, investing in renewables, and diversifying supply. International support is crucial, not just for short-term relief, but for long-term resilience. Egypt's stability is vital for the Middle East and beyond. The world must heed the warning of the silent Nile. Only through cooperation and foresight can we secure our collective future.